Well, we have one more module to cover in this series of modules that were related to social psychology. And the last one, module 46, has to do with pro-social relations. We just looked at antisocial relations, but this one was pro-social. And there are some key component parts to this as well that I want to begin to break down for you. Initially, the first thing is actually something that drives along a lot of relationships, and that's attraction. Attraction itself, if you've ever heard the phrase, a couple different phrases that oftentimes are used. First is familiarity breeds contempt. And this poor little guy up here was born a white penguin, and the zookeepers actually thought that one of the problems was going to be, or they were going to have to dye him black so that he would fit in. And ultimately, with familiarity, the colony of penguins just turned around and eventually came to accept him. So familiarity does not necessarily breed contempt, and repeated exposure to one actually has its positive effect. So there are three factors here that are key to influencing our liking for one another. The first one kind of makes sense. It's geographical proximity. It's a little longer word, so I'll take a minute to write it out. Geographical proximity is essentially people that are closest to us, and that leads to a higher level of attraction. Essentially, mere exposure, which is the effect that was identified, the mere exposure effect led to higher levels of attraction. In other words, whether that's a relationship, attraction doesn't necessarily mean anything more than acceptance. And that is one of the key components is proximity. I can't really grow an attraction to somebody who's far away from me or is not accessible to me. The second one is physical attractiveness. That also comes into play. It influences social opportunities and the way ultimately one is perceived. And so, like it or not, it is part of the backdrop of attraction itself when one is physically attractive. Of course, this is defined in very many ways, but we view attractive people as healthier, happier, more sensitive, and more successful. And so it is very much a part of the backdrop. That's oftentimes why we see people in Hollywood and other places as happier and more together, and we always get reminded at how their lives are falling apart, and that sometimes at least has an impact on our exposure or how we see them. The other one, we have four of them. The third one is similarity. And the longer we're near someone, proximity, and the more the relationship deepens, what we begin to find is that similarity of attitudes and interests greatly increases greatly increases the level of liking between two people of attitudes and interests. Increases liking between two people. And that makes sense. I mean, when you hear the phrase opposites attract, that really isn't true. It is kind of a urban myth. when in fact similarity attracts people. It's part of what brings us together is that we have a similarity of interests and so forth. And then the last one, the fourth one, is the oh gosh, I've lost my is something referred to really as the reward theory of attraction, essentially, and we see this in relationships where the net giving and taking is about equal, essentially. So when we're in a relationship, unless we have the expectation that we're going to be giving a lot, is that we like those whose behavior is rewarding to us, and we will continue relationships that offer more rewards than costs. And that sounds a little crass, but when you're in a very unequal relationship in terms of giving and taking, usually that's one of those times when define the relationship happens, essentially. I guess that's called DTR, is that correct? So, and these four main component parts are part of what we refer to as attraction, physical attractiveness, proximity, in other words, how close or accessible might be another word that people might use, how similar we are in beliefs and attitudes and interests, and then finally a relative equality of rewards and costs, which again, in some of the discussion around attraction, we think it's more ineffable, it's more ephemeral, it's not as tangible, but we expect a certain level of equality or reciprocality, if you will, in relationship in terms of costs and benefits. And social psychologists are often talking just in those terms, relationships. So those are some key points when it comes to attraction. Now let me go into a subset, and that would have to do with romantic love and the maturing of romantic love. We actually can divide it out in some respects to the first stage or level, if you will, is passionate love. It's the funnest part, not that the other parts aren't, but it is certainly the most aroused state that we have when we are falling in love with somebody. So in any kind of love relationship, you have arousal, which is all part of it, and some kind of cognitive appraisal, which goes with it, which should sound somewhat familiar because we talked about that when we were talking about emotions, is that there's a cognitive component to it. So arousal and cognitive labeling as love, as in terms of passionate love, which is where most couples start. The second maturing, if you will, of the relationship, because passionate love ultimately does not last. It is a relatively abnormal state. I mean, think about it. What other time in your life are you most consumed with one person only? And really what you'll find is that that's just rare. Your time is usually divided amongst people. And so when you fall in love with somebody, your time is very much taken up with them. But eventually, as you fall in love and get married and kids come along, then suddenly your love is multiplied, not divided, but multiplied out to other people, but also your attention is divided as well. So the second level, if you will, is often referred to as companionate love. And this has a very different I got it, yep, companionate love. And and it emerges as the relationship matures. This is a more mature state of love and attachment that occurs over time as the couple invests more and more of themselves and their history together. Usually it's enhanced by equity in the relationship. You share things, and you might put reciprocity in here, and it would fit into that category as well. Another key component of companionate love is self-disclosure. The interesting thing about community and living in community with one another is being known and knowing. That is true in our relationship with God. It's also true in our relationship with each other. So self-disclosure is a key component part of companionate love that is very much part. And then the last one is positive support for one another. That is also key in each of these. So when we're talking about attraction, we're talking about love itself. You have the passionate love, which is really the fire that gets things going and off the ground, and companionate love is a longer period of time where love matures and attachments grow deeper. There's an equity and reciprocity between the people involved, and self-disclosure, as well as a positive support for one another. And ultimately, what you will find over time is that as couples grow together, it doesn't seem as passionate, but it is a whole lot deeper. It's a little bit like our relationship with God and how it starts out. Is that a lot of times it starts out with a passionate love, but it grows to a deeper and deeper, mature kind of love in our relationship with Christ and with God himself. All right, now let's turn our attention to altruism.